Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The November fog that shrouded Baker Street that evening possessed the peculiar quality of transforming the familiar into the phantasmagorical, rendering even the most mundane gaslight into a ghostly beacon struggling against the encroaching gloom. I had been absorbed in reviewing notes from a particularly challenging consultation at St. Bartholomew's, when the urgent summons of our bell drew my attention to the sitting room, where I found Sherlock Holmes standing motionless at the window, his sharp profile etched against the amber glow of the street below. The familiar aroma of his pipe tobacco filled the air, though I observed that the pipe itself lay cold and forgotten upon the mantelpiece, suggesting that some matter of considerable interest had captured his attention entirely. "Watson," he said without turning, his voice carrying that distinctive mixture of excitement and analytical detachment that I had long recognized as the herald of an intriguing mystery. "Observe how the fog moves this evening. See how it swirls and eddies around the lampposts, creating patterns that appear almost deliberate, as if guided by some unseen intelligence." He paused, and I detected the faintest smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It reminds me of the curious case that has just presented itself to us, where the obvious explanations prove as elusive as solid ground in a marsh." Before I could inquire as to the nature of this case, Mrs. Hudson's familiar step upon the stair announced the arrival of a visitor. The lady who entered our sitting room possessed that particular combination of aristocratic bearing and barely controlled distress that immediately commanded attention. Lady Cordelia Wortham moved with the practiced grace of one accustomed to society's highest circles, yet her dark eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of recent tragedy, and her usually impeccable composure showed subtle signs of strain. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I must apologize for calling upon you at such an hour, but I find myself in desperate need of your assistance. My husband, Sir Edmund Wortham, was found dead in his private study yesterday evening under circumstances that have left both the household staff and the police utterly bewildered." Holmes turned from the window with that sudden predatory interest that always signalled his engagement with a problem worthy of his talents. "Please, Lady Wortham, be seated and tell us everything. Watson, perhaps you would be so kind as to pour our guest some brandy." As I attended to this courtesy, Lady Wortham composed herself and began her account. "Edmund was a man of rigid habits, Mr. Holmes. Every evening after dinner he would retire to his study to attend to correspondence and review his business affairs. The room was his sanctuary, and he invariably locked the door from within, preferring absolute privacy for his work. Yesterday evening proceeded no differently until approximately 11 o'clock, when our butler, Hawkins, heard what he described as a peculiar sound from the speaking tube that connects the study to the servants' hall. "A speaking tube?" Holmes inquired, his eyes sharpening with interest. "Yes. Edmund installed it years ago for convenience. Normally, he would use a small whistle to summon service when required, but Hawkins reported hearing not the familiar clear note, but rather a strange, whispering sound, followed by what seemed to be a faint crash from within the study. When repeated attempts to rouse Sir Edmund failed, and the door remained locked from the inside, the staff was forced to break it down." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "And what did they discover?" Lady Wortham's composure wavered momentarily. "Edmund was found collapsed near his writing desk, his hand outstretched toward the bell pull as if he had been attempting to summon help. The study windows were latched from within, the chimney far too narrow for human passage, and the door had indeed been secured from the inside. The key was still in the lock, turned to the locked position. "The cause of death?" I interjected, my medical training asserting itself. The physician suspects heart failure, though he seemed uncertain. There was a peculiar odour in the room, Dr. Watson, something sweet and cloying that reminded me unpleasantly of almonds, but perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery of this. She reached into her reticule and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. It was found placed precisely in the centre of Edmund's desk, though I am certain it was not there when he retired for the evening. The object, she revealed, was a whistle of extraordinary craftsmanship, fashioned from what appeared to be sterling silver and decorated with intricate engravings that seemed to shift and flow in the lamplight. It was no larger than a child's thumb, yet it possessed a weight and presence that seemed entirely disproportionate to its size. Holmes accepted the whistle with the reverence of a scholar handling an ancient manuscript. He examined it closely through his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the mouthpiece and the delicate engravings. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Watson, observe the craftsmanship. This is no common instrument, but rather a piece of considerable artistry and, I suspect, antiquity." "There is something else, Mr. Holmes," Lady Wortham continued. "Edmund's most prized possession, a medieval astrolabe of silver and gold that had been in his family for generations, was discovered missing from its display case. The servants insist it was in its proper place when they last cleaned the study 2 days ago." "An astrolabe," Holmes repeated thoughtfully. "A navigational instrument used by ancient mariners to chart their course by the stars. How poetic that such an object should vanish in connection with a case that promises to chart equally mysterious waters." At that moment, a telegram arrived via Mrs. Hudson, bearing the familiar handwriting of Inspector Lestrade. Holmes read it quickly, and I observed his eyebrows rise slightly. "It appears, Lady Wortham, that your husband's death is not an isolated incident. Lestrade informs me that 2 other gentlemen of similar social standing have died under comparable circumstances within the past fortnight. Each was found in a locked room, each death attributed to natural causes despite peculiar circumstances, and, in each case, a silver whistle of unusual design was discovered at the scene." Lady Wortham's face grew pale. "Then we are dealing with murder, Mr. Holmes." "That, madam, is precisely what we intend to determine. The pattern suggests either a most remarkable series of coincidences or the work of a mind both cunning and methodical. The silver whistle appears to be our calling card, left deliberately by someone who wishes these deaths to be connected, yet not so obviously as to immediately suggest murder to the casual observer." Holmes rose and moved to his desk, where he retrieved his coat and hat with the swift efficiency that always preceded action. "Watson, bring your medical bag. We must examine the scene while the evidence remains undisturbed. Lady Wortham, if you would be so kind as to accompany us, your intimate knowledge of your husband's habits may prove invaluable." As we prepared to depart into the fog-shrouded night, Holmes paused at the door, the silver whistle still in his hand. He raised it to his lips and attempted to produce a sound, but as Lady Wortham had indicated, it remained silent. "Curious," he observed. "A whistle that cannot whistle, found in a locked room where a man died alone, connected to the disappearance of an instrument used to navigate by the stars. The elements of our mystery are as intriguing as they are contradictory, Watson. I suspect we are about to encounter one of those cases where the impossible proves merely improbable, and the improbable reveals itself to be ingeniously simple." The hansom cab that carried us through the fog-draped streets seemed to move through a world transformed, where familiar landmarks became ghostly suggestions, and the very air itself seemed thick with secrets waiting to be unveiled. As we approached the imposing facade of Wortham House in Belgrave Square, I could not shake the feeling that we were about to step into a carefully constructed puzzle, one where each piece had been placed with deliberate precision by a mind that understood both the power of misdirection and the fatal weakness of human nature. The silver whistle in Holmes's pocket seemed to pulse with mysterious significance as we mounted the steps to begin our investigation into what would prove to be one of the most intricate and deadly cases of our long partnership. The imposing facade of Wortham House loomed before us through the November fog, its Georgian columns and ornate stonework bearing the weight of generations, of accumulated wealth and respectability. As our hansom drew to a halt, I observed a police constable stationed discreetly near the entrance, his presence a subtle reminder that Scotland Yard had already taken an interest in the proceedings. Lady Wortham's composure remained admirably intact as we mounted the steps, though I detected the slight tremor in her gloved hands as she reached for the brass door-knocker. We were admitted by Hawkins, the butler, whose composed demeanour could not entirely mask the pallor of recent shock. His movements retained the practised efficiency of long service, yet there was something in his eyes that spoke of a man who had looked upon the inexplicable and found his ordered world suddenly uncertain. As he conducted us through corridors lined with ancestral portraits, their painted eyes seeming to follow our progress, Lady Wortham provided quiet commentary on the household's routine. "Hawkins has served our family faithfully for nearly 20 years, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper in the hushed atmosphere. Edmund trusted him implicitly with all domestic matters, and I fear the shock of that terrible evening has affected him deeply." The study door itself bore unmistakable evidence of the forced entry, its lower panels splintered, and the brass lock mechanism twisted beyond repair. Holmes immediately knelt to examine the damaged wood, his magnifying glass catching the gaslight as he traced the pattern of destruction with characteristic precision. "The force was applied from without, as expected," he murmured. "Yet observe, Watson, how the key remained turned in the locked position even after the frame gave way." Lady Wortham hesitated at the threshold, her earlier composure finally wavering. "I have not entered since that night, Mr. Holmes. The very air seems to hold the memory of Edmund's final moments." Holmes, displaying an unexpected gentleness, suggested she might prefer to wait in the drawing-room while we conducted our examination, but she declined with quiet determination. The study revealed itself as a sanctuary of scholarly pursuit, with leather-bound volumes creating a fortress of learning around a massive mahogany desk. The air still carried that faint, sweet odour Lady Wortham had described, though considerably diminished since the previous evening. Holmes began his methodical examination at the door, working inward in an expanding spiral that would eventually encompass every detail of the room. "Hawkins," Holmes said without looking up from his inspection of the carpet, "tell me precisely what visitors Sir Edmund received yesterday evening." The butler's brow furrowed in concentration. "After dinner, Mr. Julian Armitage called, sir. An antiquarian dealer with whom Sir Edmund occasionally conducted business. They met here in the study for perhaps 20 minutes, discussing some manuscript or artifact. They parted on cordial terms, with Mr. Armitage expressing hope for future dealings." "And after Mr. Armitage departed?" "At 10 o'clock, Mr. Lionel Wortham arrived, Sir Edmund's nephew. He brought a parcel, which I placed on the hall table, as instructed. Sir Edmund admitted no one else that evening." Holmes had moved to the desk, where he examined the leather surface with intense scrutiny. Using a small mirror from his pocket, he studied the faint impressions left on the blotter by previous correspondence. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "Watson, observe these reversed impressions. Appointment, Thursday, Red Lion Court, S.V. Your husband maintained active business correspondence, Lady Wortham." "Red Lion Court," she replied with evident puzzlement. "I know nothing of such a place." Edmund was private regarding certain investments, but he never mentioned that location. Near the fireplace, Holmes discovered fragments of torn paper in the wastepaper basket. Using his tweezers, he extracted a piece bearing partial text. Ves and var, mathematical instrument, Red Lion Court. He slipped this evidence into his pocketbook without comment, though I observed the slight quickening of his movements that indicated significant discovery. The speaking tube itself drew his particular attention, its brass mechanism mounted near the hearth with an ornate cover designed for discreet communication with the servants' hall below. Holmes tested its function, confirming that voices carried clearly between floors before examining the metal surface for any trace evidence. "The whisper you heard, Hawkins?" Holmes said. "Describe it once more, with complete precision." "It was unlike anything I had heard before, sir. Not Sir Edmund's usual clear whistle, but rather a sighing sound, as if air were escaping under pressure. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds, followed by what seemed to be something falling." Holmes straightened, his keen eyes surveying the room with that peculiar intensity that indicated his mind was rapidly assembling scattered fragments into a coherent pattern. The mystery of Sir Edmund Wortham's death was revealing layers of complexity that extended far beyond the apparent locked room puzzle, and I sensed that my friend had already begun to perceive connections that remained invisible to ordinary observation. Holmes returned his attention to the speaking tube with renewed intensity, his keen eyes studying the brass mechanism as though it might yield its secrets through sheer force of observation. He withdrew a small, flexible wire from his examination kit and carefully inserted it into the tube's opening, probing with the delicate touch of a surgeon. When he withdrew the instrument, I observed him examining its tip through his magnifying glass with particular interest. "Most illuminating, Watson," he murmured, though his expression suggested the discovery was more puzzling than clarifying. "The interior bears traces of a fine metallic powder, almost imperceptible to casual observation. Yet there is something else." He moved closer to the tube's opening and inhaled carefully, his nostrils flaring slightly. "That same sweet almond-like odour we detected earlier, though considerably fainter here." Lady Wortham watched these proceedings with growing apprehension. "Mr. Holmes, surely you cannot mean that the speaking tube itself was somehow involved in my husband's death?" "All possibilities must be considered, madam," Holmes replied, his attention now focused on the ornate brass cover that concealed the tube's mechanism. With practiced efficiency, he produced a small screwdriver and began to carefully remove the fitting. "Observe, Watson, how these screws show signs of recent disturbance. The metal bears fresh scratches that do not align with the weathering patterns of the surrounding brass." As the cover came free, Holmes peered into the revealed mechanism with his magnifying glass. His sudden stillness told me he had discovered something of significance. Using his tweezers, he extracted a minute fragment of what appeared to be cork or rubber, placing it carefully in one of his specimen envelopes. "Hawkins," Holmes said without looking up from his examination, "you mentioned a decorative plaque that hung above this tube. Describe it in detail, if you please." The butler's brow furrowed in concentration. "A small wooden carving, sir, perhaps 6 inches square, depicting celestial symbols. Sir Edmund was quite fond of it, said it complemented his scholarly pursuits. It hung directly above the tube opening, secured by a small brass hook." Holmes directed his gaze upward, and I followed his line of sight to observe a bare section of wallpaper bearing the faint outline of a rectangular object. The absence was so subtle that it might easily have escaped notice during the initial shock of discovering Sir Edmund's body. "When did you last observe this plaque in its proper position?" Holmes inquired. "Yesterday morning, sir, when I dusted the study as usual. I'm certain it was there then." Before Holmes could respond further, We heard the familiar tread of Inspector Lestrade ascending the stairs, his voice carrying clearly as he spoke with Mrs. Hudson in the hallway below. Lady Wortham rose to receive him, her composure admirably maintained despite the growing complexity of the investigation. Lestrade entered the study with his characteristic blend of official authority and barely concealed frustration. After expressing his condolences to Lady Wortham, he turned to Holmes with evident relief. "Thank heavens you're here, Holmes. This business grows more confounding by the hour." From his coat pocket, Lestrade produced a small object wrapped in cloth. This was found at the scene of Sir Felix Grantley's death in Mayfair 2 weeks past. Same circumstances, locked room, natural death according to the physician, and this left precisely centred on the deceased's writing desk. The object proved to be another silver whistle, identical in craftsmanship to the one Lady Wortham had brought to Baker Street, save for minute variations in the decorative engravings. Like its counterpart, it produced no sound when tested. "There's been a third case as well," Lestrade continued grimly. "Mr. Theodore Blackwood of Knightsbridge, though the family insists on complete discretion. Same pattern, locked room, apparent heart failure, and one of these infernal whistles left behind. The only common thread I've discovered is that all 3 gentlemen were collectors of scientific instruments and antiquities." Holmes accepted the second whistle and examined it closely, comparing its weight and dimensions to the first. "Most instructive, Lestrade. The craftsmanship suggests a single maker, yet these are not mass-produced items. Each bears subtle individual characteristics that speak of careful, deliberate creation." "There's something else," Lestrade added, consulting his notebook. All 3 victims had recent contact with dealers in scientific instruments. Sir Edmund here received a visit from one Julian Armitage on the evening of his death. The same Armitage called upon Sir Felix Grantley just days before his demise. Lady Wortham started at this revelation. "Mr. Armitage seemed perfectly respectable when he called. He and Edmund discussed some manuscript or artifact for perhaps 20 minutes before parting on cordial terms." Holmes had moved to examine the package that still lay upon the hall table, the one delivered by Sir Edmund's nephew on the fatal evening. With Lady Wortham's permission, he carefully opened the wrapping to reveal a slim volume bound in dark leather, accompanied by a printed circular bearing. The heading Vestry and Vale, Mathematical Instrument Makers, Red Lion Court, Fleet Street. "Red Lion Court," Holmes repeated thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the printed text. "Watson, does that location hold any significance for you?" I searched my memory but could recall nothing specific about the address. "I confess it means nothing to me, Holmes, though Fleet Street is certainly well known for its concentration of specialized trades." Holmes folded the circular carefully and placed it in his pocketbook alongside the other evidence. "Lestrade, I believe our investigation must extend beyond these domestic scenes. The pattern you describe suggests a methodical campaign, one that requires considerable knowledge of both chemistry and mechanical engineering." "Chemistry?" Lady Wortham inquired with evident alarm. "The sweet odour that pervaded this room, combined with the traces I've discovered in the speaking tube mechanism, suggests the use of substances that few would have ready access to," Holmes explained carefully. "We are dealing with someone possessed of both scientific knowledge and considerable cunning." As we prepared to depart Wortham House, Holmes paused at the study door for one final survey of the scene. The silver whistle caught the gaslight as he turned it in his palm, its silent surface reflecting our images in miniature. "Red Lion Court awaits us, Watson," he said quietly. "I suspect we shall find that Vestry and Vale have much to tell us about the art of creating instruments that speak without sound and whisper messages that only the dead can hear." The fog had thickened during our examination, transforming the London streets into a maze of shadows and suggestion. As our hansom carried us toward Fleet Street, I could not escape the growing certainty that we were pursuing a mind of exceptional cleverness, one that had transformed the very tools of scientific inquiry into instruments of death. The hansom cab's wheels echoed hollowly against the fog-dampened cobblestones as we made our way through the labyrinthine streets toward Fleet Street. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, occasionally withdrawing one of the silver whistles to examine it under the flickering carriage lamp. The interplay of gaslight and shadow across the intricate engravings seemed to animate the mysterious symbols, as though they contained secrets that might be coaxed forth through patient observation. "Consider, Watson," Holmes said at length, his voice cutting through the rhythmic clatter of hooves, "the deliberate artistry of our perpetrator. These are not merely functional instruments left behind by accident, but carefully crafted messages intended for someone who possesses the knowledge to interpret their significance. The question that intrigues me is whether we are meant to understand these symbols, or whether they serve an entirely different purpose." Red Lion Court revealed itself as a narrow passage threading between the larger thoroughfares, its ancient buildings leaning inward as though sharing whispered confidences in the fog-laden air. The cobblestones bore the polish of centuries, worn smooth by countless feet seeking the specialized services that such hidden enclaves provided. Gas lamps at irregular intervals created pools of amber illumination, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and dance with each movement of the mist. The establishment of Vestry and Vale occupied a narrow shop front distinguished by windows filled with an impressive array of scientific instruments. Brass sextants gleamed beside polished telescopes, while delicate astrolabes shared space with mechanical calculators of bewildering complexity. The craftsmanship on display was extraordinary, each piece bearing the hallmarks of both technical precision and artistic sensibility. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured as we approached the entrance, "the quality of workmanship visible even from the street. Note particularly that astrolabe in the corner window, its silver inlay work bearing remarkable similarity to the engravings on our mysterious whistles. We are dealing with artisans of the highest caliber." A small bell announced our entry into the shop's interior, where the scent of brass polish and fine oils mingled with something else, a faint chemical odor that spoke of specialized processes and exotic materials. The proprietor emerged from behind a counter laden with delicate chronometers, a man of perhaps 60 years whose pale, intelligent eyes held the intensity of one accustomed to working with minute precision. "Gentlemen," he said in refined accents, "I am Cornelius Vale. How may I be of service this evening?" Holmes produced the circular we had discovered at Wortham House, placing it carefully upon the polished counter. "We are investigating the recent death of Sir Edmund Wortham and have found your establishment's name among his papers. I understand he was a collector of scientific instruments." Vale's expression grew thoughtful, though he maintained his courteous demeanor. Indeed, Sir Edmund was a valued client. I was deeply saddened to learn of his passing. He possessed an exceptional appreciation for the finer examples of our craft, particularly those pieces that combined scientific function with historical significance. Holmes withdrew the 2 silver whistles and laid them side by side upon the counter. "Are you familiar with instruments of this particular design, Mr. Vale?" The craftsman lifted one of the whistles with practiced hands, turning it slowly as his experienced eye catalogued every detail of its construction. "Exquisite workmanship," he murmured, "though not of our direct manufacture. The engraving style is distinctive, and the silver alloy appears to be of unusual composition. However, I must confess that Sir Edmund, along with 2 other gentlemen of similar interests, brought identical pieces to my shop within recent weeks, seeking examination and possible restoration. Lestrade, who had accompanied us from Wortham House, leaned forward with evident interest. 2 other gentlemen, you say? Would these be Sir Felix Grantley and Mr. Theodore Blackwood? Precisely so, Vale confirmed. Each gentleman presented his whistle with the same request to determine its age and authenticity, and if possible, to restore its functionality. I regret to say that my examinations proved inconclusive. The internal mechanism has been deliberately sealed, rendering the instruments incapable of producing sound. Holmes examined the whistles more closely under Vale's magnifying apparatus. You mentioned that these gentlemen were introduced to your services. By whom, if I may ask? A Mr. Julian Armitage, Vale replied, his tone becoming more guarded. An antiquarian dealer who occasionally brings items for authentication or specialized work. I must say his business practices have sometimes struck me as rather irregular. In what manner irregular? Holmes pressed. Vale hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with speaking ill of a client. Mr. Armitage has presented items claiming ancient provenance that show clear signs of recent manufacture. When I have pointed out these discrepancies, he has become quite insistent that my observations remain confidential. He seems more interested in creating convincing narratives than in establishing genuine historical accuracy. From his examination kit, Holmes produced a small envelope containing the rubber fragment discovered in the speaking tube at Wortham House. Mr. Vale, would you be so kind as to examine this material? I found it in connection with Sir Edmund's death. Vale accepted the fragment with tweezers, studying it carefully before touching it to his tongue in the manner of an experienced craftsman testing materials. This is rubber, certainly, but of a type I do not immediately recognize. It has been treated with some chemical compound that renders it more brittle than natural rubber, yet also more resistant to heat. We occasionally use rubber gaskets in our pneumatic instruments, but this specimen shows properties that suggest specialized preparation. Holmes and I exchanged meaningful glances. The technical expertise required to modify rubber in such a specific manner pointed to someone with considerable knowledge of both chemistry and mechanical engineering. Has Mr. Armitage visited your establishment recently? Holmes inquired. Yesterday afternoon, in fact, Vale replied. He brought yet another of those curious whistles, requesting the same examination that the other gentleman had sought. When I informed him that my previous attempts had been unsuccessful, he became quite agitated, insisting that there must be some method of determining their true purpose. Holmes moved to examine the various instruments displayed throughout the shop, his keen eyes cataloguing each piece with characteristic thoroughness. Near a collection of speaking tubes and pneumatic devices, he paused with evident interest. Mr. Vale, I observe that you specialize in communication devices as well as navigational instruments. Have you supplied speaking tube installations to private residences? Occasionally, yes. We provide complete pneumatic communication systems for larger households. The work requires considerable precision to ensure clear transmission and proper sealing of all connections. And have you performed any recent installations or maintenance for Sir Edmund Wortham, Sir Felix Grantley, or Mr. Theodore Blackwood? Vale consulted a leather-bound ledger, his finger tracing down columns of meticulous entries. Indeed, we installed decorative speaking tube covers for all 3 gentlemen within the past several months. Each requested the same design, a celestial motif that would complement their scholarly studies. The work was performed by my partner, Mr. Samuel Vestry, who handles our more specialized installations. Holmes's eyes sharpened with interest. And where might we find Mr. Vestry this evening? He is attending to a private consultation in Bloomsbury and is not expected to return until tomorrow morning, Vale replied. He is most thorough in his aftercare service, often making follow-up visits to ensure complete customer satisfaction. The shop's bell chimed suddenly, and we turned to observe a figure entering from the fog-shrouded street. The newcomer was a man of medium height and unremarkable appearance, save for eyes that held an intelligence both keen and calculating. His surprise at finding customers in Vale's shop was quickly masked by a practiced smile of professional courtesy. "Mr. Vale," the man said smoothly, "I trust you have made progress with the item we discussed yesterday." His gaze fell upon Holmes and myself with the appraising look of one accustomed to evaluating both objects and people for their potential value. The silver whistles lying upon the counter caught his attention immediately, and I observed a flicker of what might have been recognition cross his features. "Gentlemen," he continued with studied casualness, "I see you share an interest in unusual instruments. Those pieces appear to be of exceptional quality." Holmes regarded the newcomer with that penetrating stare that had unnerved countless individuals across London's criminal underworld. "Indeed, Mr. Armitage, for I presume that is who you are. Though I confess these particular instruments seem reluctant to perform their intended function." The antiquarian's composure wavered almost imperceptibly at being so readily identified. "You have the advantage of me, sir. Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We are investigating the recent deaths of Sir Edmund Wortham, Sir Felix Grantley, and Mr. Theodore Blackwood, all of whom appear to have had business dealings with you shortly before their demise." Armitage's smile became more strained, though he maintained his air of professional courtesy. "A tragic series of coincidences, Mr. Holmes. All three gentlemen were valued clients who shared a passion for historical instruments. I merely facilitated their acquisitions." "Including these silver whistles?" Holmes indicated the instruments on the counter. "Those pieces came to my attention through various channels," Armitage replied carefully. "When I learned of my client's interest in such items, I naturally brought them to their attention. I had hoped Mr. Vale might be able to authenticate their historical significance." Holmes picked up one of the whistles, turning it slowly in the gaslight. "Most curious, Mr. Armitage, that three gentlemen should die so soon after acquiring instruments of such distinctive design. One might almost suspect these objects carry some form of curse." The tension in the small shop had become palpable, and I sensed that we stood at the threshold of discoveries that would illuminate the dark mystery surrounding the three deaths. Yet even as the evidence seemed to point toward Armitage's involvement, I detected that familiar glint in Holmes's eye that suggested the true solution remained tantalizingly beyond our grasp. "Watson," Holmes said quietly as we prepared to take our leave, "I believe our investigation has only begun to scratch the surface of this most intriguing puzzle. The threads are beginning to weave themselves into a pattern, but I suspect the true design is far more complex than these initial revelations would suggest." The fog pressed against the windows like curious spectators as we stepped back into the night, carrying with us more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that we were dealing with a mind of exceptional cunning and deadly purpose. The fog seemed to press closer as we emerged from the narrow confines of Red Lion Court, transforming Fleet Street into a labyrinth of shadows and muffled sounds. Holmes walked with that peculiar intensity I had learned to recognize as the prelude to significant deduction, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail of our surroundings even as his mind processed the evening's revelations. Lestrade, meanwhile, displayed the satisfaction of a man convinced that the case was approaching its resolution. "Well, Holmes," the inspector declared, as we approached our waiting hansom, "it seems clear enough. This Armitage fellow has connections to all three victims, access to those mysterious whistles, and his behavior tonight was decidedly suspicious. I'll have my men shadow him from this moment forward." Holmes paused with one hand upon the carriage door, his expression thoughtful. "Indeed, Lestrade, Mr. Armitage presents a most convenient solution to our puzzle. Perhaps too convenient?" He withdrew one of the silver whistles, studying its intricate engravings in the gaslight. "Consider the precision required for these crimes, the specialized knowledge of chemistry and pneumatic systems, the exact timing needed to create such perfect locked room mysteries. Does our antiquarian dealer truly possess such comprehensive expertise?" "He deals in scientific instruments," Lestrade countered. "Surely that provides the necessary knowledge." "Knowledge of their sale and authentication, certainly," Holmes replied. "But the modification of rubber compounds, the creation of sealed pressure systems, the precise coordination of events suggests someone with practical engineering experience, not merely commercial familiarity." As we settled into the hansom, Holmes directed the driver not toward Baker Street, but back to Belgrave Square. "Watson, before we can proceed further, we must examine the mechanism by which these crimes were accomplished. The speaking tube in the servants' hall may yet yield secrets that the study above could not." The return to Wortham House found the household still subdued by recent tragedy, though Hawkins received us with dignified composure. He led us immediately to the servants' hall, where the lower terminus of the speaking tube awaited our examination. The brass fitting bore the discreet stamp of vestry and veil, and Holmes knelt beside it with the reverence of a scholar approaching an ancient text. His examination was methodical and thorough. Using his magnifying glass, he studied the screw heads that secured the decorative collar, noting the fresh tool marks that scored the brass. With a slip of oiled paper, he sampled the interior surface, revealing a faint residue that carried that same sweet, cloying odor we had detected in the study above. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, indicating the shallow burrs around each screw slot. "These have been turned recently, yet Hawkins assures us no servant has interfered with the mechanism." Hawkins, who had been watching our proceedings with growing interest, suddenly straightened. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but a gentleman from Vestry and Vale did call perhaps a fortnight ago, inquiring whether the new decorative cover suited Sir Edmund's requirements. He made what he termed a trifling adjustment to ensure proper fit." Holmes's eyes sharpened with interest. "Describe this gentleman in complete detail." "A man of middle height, sir, pale and spare, with a dark beard trimmed close. His eyes seemed to weigh everything they encountered, and he possessed a quiet, methodical manner. He signed our visitor's book as Mr. Samuel Vestry." The significance of this revelation was not lost upon any of us. Vestry, the absent partner whose specialized knowledge had been mentioned so casually by Vale, had personally visited each victim's residence to make adjustments to their speaking tube installations. Holmes conducted several experiments with the tube mechanism, demonstrating how different methods of air pressure could produce the whispering sound Hawkins had described. The evidence of recent tampering was unmistakable, from the modified gasket seals to the minute scoring on the inner pipe where some device had been temporarily mounted. We were interrupted in our examination by Mrs. Hudson's arrival, announcing that a gentleman awaited us in the drawing-room with urgent information regarding Sir Edmund's death. The visitor proved to be a man of perhaps 40 years, well-dressed, but bearing unmistakable signs of distress. His introduction carried the weight of confession. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began without preamble, "I am Lionel Wortham, Sir Edmund's nephew. I fear I have not been entirely truthful regarding the circumstances of my uncle's death, and my silence may have endangered others." Holmes gestured for him to continue, and the story that emerged cast our investigation in an entirely new light. The package Lionel had delivered on the evening of Sir Edmund's death contained more than merely a book. and circular. Hidden within the binding was a small mechanical device, something he had been instructed to present as a gift from the antiquarian community. "The gentleman who approached me," Lionel continued, his voice trembling with the effort of confession, "identified himself as Samuel Vestry. He possessed detailed knowledge of my uncle's habits and interests, information that could only have come from careful observation. The device he provided was described as a timing mechanism designed to activate a musical surprise at precisely 11 o'clock. The pieces of our puzzle were aligning themselves with terrifying clarity. A timing device placed within the study and activated at the exact moment when Hawkins heard the mysterious whisper through the speaking tube. The modified pneumatic system that could deliver some deadly substance with precise coordination. Before Holmes could pursue this revelation further, the urgent peal of the doorbell announced another visitor. A police constable appeared, breathless from rapid travel through the fog-laden streets. "Inspector Lestrade's compliments, Mr. Holmes," he announced, "and would you come immediately to Bloomsbury? There's been another death, sir, under circumstances identical to the previous 3. A Mr. Geoffrey Whitmore found locked in his study with one of those silver whistles placed upon his desk." Holmes rose with that predatory grace that marked moments of supreme deduction. "The 4th death, Watson, but I suspect it may also prove to be the last. Our Mr. Vestry has grown overconfident, and overconfidence has been the downfall of many a clever criminal." As we prepared to venture once more into the fog-shrouded night, Holmes examined the silver whistle with renewed intensity. "The pattern becomes clear at last," he murmured. "We have been observing not random murders, but a methodical campaign executed with scientific precision. The whistles, the locked rooms, even Mr. Armitage himself have been elaborate misdirection, designed to conceal a far simpler and more deadly truth." The silver whistle caught the firelight as Holmes turned it in his palm, its engravings seeming to pulse with malevolent significance. These silent instruments had somehow orchestrated a symphony of death across London's most respectable households, and we were finally beginning to understand the conductor's true identity. "The silver whisper speaks at last, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "and I believe we are prepared to hear its true message." The journey through fog-shrouded London to Bloomsbury carried with it the weight of mounting dread, as though each revolution of our hansom's wheels brought us closer to a truth both terrible and inevitable. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, the silver whistle turning slowly in his palm, its intricate engravings catching the intermittent gaslight that struggled to penetrate the November mist. The precision required for these crimes, the methodical nature of their execution, spoke of a mind that had transformed the very instruments of scientific progress into weapons of extraordinary subtlety. The residence of Mr. Geoffrey Whitmore occupied a corner position on a tree-lined square, its Georgian facade bearing the understated elegance that marked the homes of London's scholarly class. Police lanterns created pools of amber illumination in the fog, and I observed several constables maintaining a discreet perimeter around the property. Lestrade met us at the entrance, his expression carrying that familiar mixture of frustration and grim determination that invariably accompanied such scenes. "Same pattern exactly, Holmes," he reported without preamble. "Mr. Whitmore was found collapsed in his study at approximately 11:15 this evening, the door locked from within, windows secure from the inside, and that infernal whistle placed precisely in the centre of his writing desk. The family physician attributes the death to heart failure, though he admits to being puzzled by certain symptoms he observed. We were conducted immediately to the study, where the scene presented itself with the terrible familiarity of our previous investigations. Mr. Geoffrey Whitmore lay with his head canted slightly, as though listening to some distant instruction, his right hand fallen near the bell pull, and his features bearing that peculiar tranquility I had observed in cases of sudden cardiac paralysis. The room bore all the hallmarks of scholarly pursuit, with astronomical charts adorning the walls and an impressive collection of navigational instruments displayed in glass cases. The air carried that same sweet, cloying odour we had encountered at each previous scene, though here it seemed more pronounced. Holmes immediately threw up the sash, directing a draught across the room, and instructed the constables to refrain from striking fresh matches until the vapours had dissipated. His precautions spoke volumes about his growing understanding of the method employed. I knelt to make a brief examination of the deceased. There were no marks of violence, the pupils were moderately dilated, and an almost imperceptible scent of bitter almond clung to the lips. I whispered my observations to Holmes, who nodded once, his eyes already travelling to the polished brass fitting of a speaking tube set neatly into the panelling beside the mantel. Holmes began his examination with that methodical precision I had witnessed countless times, yet I observed a new urgency in his movements, as though he sensed that time itself had become a crucial factor in our investigation. The speaking tube installation bore the familiar stamp of vestry and veil, and when he tested the mechanism, we heard his voice carry clearly to the servants' quarters below. Using his magnifying glass, Holmes studied the screw heads that secured the decorative collar, noting the fresh tool marks that scored the brass. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, indicating the shallow burrs around each screw slot. "These have been turned recently, yet the household staff assures us no servant has interfered with the mechanism." With practiced efficiency, he removed the decorative collar, revealing the same evidence of tampering we had discovered at Wortham House. A faint smear of darkened grease marked the threads, and a minute shaving of rubber was lodged beneath the rim. Using a slip of oiled paper, he sampled the interior surface, sealing the specimen in his pocketbook with the care of a scholar, preserving ancient manuscripts. The housekeeper, a spare woman whose anxious demeanour spoke of recent shock, confirmed the pattern we had come to expect. 3 days earlier, a gentleman from Vestry and Vale had called to make what he termed a trifling adjustment to ensure the speaking tube's optimal performance. Her description of the visitor tallied in every particular with those furnished by the staff at our previous crime scenes. "At 11 o'clock precisely," she reported, "I heard a soft sighing in the servants' passage, as though wind played in the pipes, followed by a muffled thud from above. When we attempted to enter Mr. Whitmore's study and found the door locked from within, we were forced to send for the police immediately." Holmes moved to examine the hearth, where Lestrade drew his attention to fragments of very thin glass that had been swept from the carpet. Holmes spread them upon a visiting card and regarded them through his lens, noting that several pieces bore a faint bluish stain at their edges. His examination of the mantel clock revealed a tiny vacant recess where some additional mechanism might lately have been secured. "A timing device, Watson," he observed quietly, "actuated for a single, specific purpose." While Lestrade arranged for the removal of the body, Holmes conducted a swift circuit of the room's cases and shelves. Several valuable instruments were present, but an empty velvet-lined frame upon the wall drew his particular attention. The marks of recent displacement were unmistakable, and when pressed, the housekeeper confessed that Mr. Whitmore's prized silver sextant had been removed within the last week to be cleaned by the dealer who had supplied it. She produced the dealer's card from a drawer bearing the name Julian Armitage in neat copper plate. Yet Holmes's eyes had drifted not to the card itself, but to a speck of dark, resinous substance clinging to the frame where the instrument's mounting had rested. He touched it with the blade of his penknife, inhaled carefully, and looked with renewed intensity at the speaking tube mechanism. From the kitchen, Holmes requested vinegar and iron filings, to the considerable bewilderment of the staff. With these simple materials, he performed a small chemical test upon the bluish smear left upon one of the glass fragments. The faintest tinge of colour answered his experiment, upon which he became abruptly silent and more abstracted than ever, pacing the room with long strides, while his fingers idly turned one of the silent whistles. Our investigation was interrupted by the arrival of a constable bearing urgent news from Red Lion Court. The premises of Vestry and Vale had been found closed and apparently abandoned, with signs of hasty departure evident throughout. A thorough search had revealed a workshop containing equipment for both metalworking and chemical preparation, along with detailed diagrams showing the internal mechanisms of speaking tube systems. "The evidence is overwhelming," Lestrade declared with evident satisfaction. "Vestry is clearly our man, with Armitage as his accomplice. We have motive, method, and opportunity clearly established." Yet Holmes remained thoughtful, continuing to turn the silver whistle slowly in his palm as he weighed the accumulated evidence. "Indeed, Lestrade, the case against Vestry appears most compelling, yet I cannot escape the feeling that we are observing a carefully orchestrated performance rather than discovering the natural course of events. Why would such a meticulous criminal leave such comprehensive evidence of his methods?" Before we could pursue this troubling question further, Mrs. Hudson appeared with a telegram that had been delivered to our Baker Street lodgings, but forwarded to our current location. Holmes read the brief message with growing intensity, his eyebrows rising slightly as he absorbed its implications. "Watson," he said quietly, consulting his pocket watch, "it appears we are to be granted an opportunity to resolve this mystery in the most direct manner possible. Our correspondent requests a meeting at Red Lion Court within the hour, promising revelations that will illuminate the true purpose behind these elaborate crimes." The fog had thickened during our investigation, transforming the familiar streets of London into an alien landscape where gaslight struggled against the encroaching darkness. As we prepared to venture forth into this shrouded world, I could not shake the conviction that we were walking directly into a trap of exceptional cunning, one that had been prepared with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized each of the murders we had investigated. "The Silver Whisper speaks at last, Watson," Holmes observed as our hansom disappeared into the swirling mist. "And I believe we are finally prepared to hear its true message, whatever the cost may prove to be." The fog-shrouded journey to Red Lion Court carried with it an oppressive weight that seemed to press against the very walls of our hansom, transforming the familiar rhythms of London into something altogether more sinister. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, the silver whistle turning slowly between his fingers as he weighed the implications of our mysterious correspondent's summons. The precision required for these crimes, the methodical nature of their execution, had convinced me that we were approaching not merely a meeting, but a carefully orchestrated confrontation with a mind of exceptional cunning. Red Lion Court revealed itself through the November mist, like a stage set prepared for the final act of some macabre drama. The narrow passage seemed even more constricted than during our earlier visit, the fog pooling among the ancient cobblestones and creating an atmosphere of deliberate isolation. The premises of Vestry and Vale stood before us with darkened windows, yet something in the quality of that darkness suggested not abandonment but patient waiting. Holmes directed our driver to halt some distance from the entrance, his keen eyes studying the approaches with characteristic thoroughness. "Watson," he said quietly, checking his service revolver with practiced efficiency, "observe how the fog moves differently here, creating eddies and currents that speak of recent disturbance. Our correspondent has been active in preparing for our arrival." We approached on foot, our footsteps muffled by the thick mist that seemed to absorb sound itself. The shop door stood slightly ajar, revealing a narrow slice of darkness within, yet no gaslight betrayed the presence of our mysterious host. Holmes paused at the threshold, his hand resting lightly upon his weapon, and gestured for me to remain behind him as we entered the abandoned premises. The interior had been systematically altered since our previous visit, with the heavier instruments arranged to create clear sight lines while maintaining areas of concealment. Upon a central workbench lay an array of apparatus that immediately commanded Holmes's attention. Coils of narrow rubber tubing fitted with clamps of unusual design, a rack of delicate glass ampoules each no thicker than a goose quill, and most significantly a brass cylinder fitted with clockwork mechanism that bore unmistakable resemblance to a timing device. Holmes moved immediately to examine this contrivance, his magnifying glass revealing intricate details of its construction. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, indicating a shallow tray beneath the cylinder fitted with felt and a needle-like projection. A delayed-action puncture device. Set the vial, align the mechanism, wind the clockwork, and one achieves a precise delivery at any predetermined moment. Beside the apparatus lay an open ledger whose pages revealed the systematic nature of our adversary's campaign. Holmes's finger traced down columns of neat script recording installations, adjustments, and, most tellingly, payments received through Julian Armitage for the cleaning and removal of prized instruments from each victim's collection. From the shadows at the rear of the workshop came the soft scrape of a footstep, followed by the measured voice of one who had been observing our examination with professional interest. "Your deductions are admirably precise, Mr. Holmes. I confess myself impressed by the thoroughness of your investigation." The speaker stepped into the dim light filtering through the fog-shrouded windows, revealing himself as a man of spare build and middle years, his pale eyes holding the intensity of one accustomed to working with minute precision. His dark beard was trimmed close, and his movements possessed the deliberate care of a craftsman handling delicate mechanisms. "Samuel Vestry, I presume?" Holmes said without surprise, his revolver remaining steady in his hand. "Though I suspect you have prepared more than one identity for this evening's performance." The man inclined his head with something approaching respect. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, I am Samuel Vestry, master craftsman, and, as you have so astutely deduced, the architect of what you term the Silver Whisper murders, though I prefer to think of them as acts of justice long delayed." Holmes gestured toward the apparatus on the workbench. Justice delivered through prussic acid vapor, precisely timed and delivered via modified speaking tube systems. Most ingenious, though I confess the elaborate misdirection of the silver whistles struck me as unnecessarily theatrical. Vestry's expression darkened with something approaching pride. "The whistles served multiple purposes, Mr. Holmes. They announced my presence to those with knowledge to interpret their significance, while simultaneously directing official investigation toward imaginary conspiracies and locked-room impossibilities. Each was crafted by my own hand, bearing symbols that would have been recognized by my late father had he lived to see his genius properly acknowledged. The pieces of our puzzle were aligning themselves with terrible clarity. The missing instruments from each victim's collection, the systematic elimination of collectors who possessed pieces crafted by Vestry's father, the elaborate murder method designed to conceal the obvious motive of theft and revenge. "Your father was the true craftsman," Holmes observed, his tone carrying neither condemnation nor approval, merely the detached interest of one seeking to understand a complex mechanism. These gentlemen possessed instruments of his creation, yet failed to appreciate their true artistry. "They collected them as curiosities," Vestry replied, his voice growing harsh with long-suppressed resentment. "Display pieces to impress their scholarly friends, while remaining ignorant of the genius that had brought them into being. Each of my victims owned pieces that represented years of my father's finest work, yet none understood their significance beyond mere monetary value. Holmes moved closer to the timing device, his keen eyes studying its construction with professional appreciation. The pneumatic delivery system required considerable expertise to modify. The rubber gaskets, the precise calibration of pressure and timing, the chemical preparation of the prussic acid in vapor form. You possess skills far beyond those of a mere craftsman. My father taught me well, Vestry replied. He understood that true artistry required mastery of both mechanical and chemical principles. The speaking tube installations provided the perfect delivery system, while the timing devices ensured that I would be far from each scene when the silver whisper spoke its final message. The fog pressed against the workshop windows like spectators eager to witness the conclusion of our deadly confrontation, while in the shadows of the abandoned shop, the accumulated evidence of 4 carefully planned murders awaited the final revelations that would expose the complete truth behind the silver whisper's meaning. Yet even as the technical method stood revealed, I sensed that Holmes had detected layers of complexity that remained hidden, waiting to be unveiled in the dramatic moments that lay ahead. "Most illuminating, Mr. Vestry," Holmes said quietly, his revolver never wavering. "Yet I suspect there are aspects of your campaign that we have not yet fully explored, the involvement of Mr. Armitage, for instance, and the question of whether your quest for justice has truly reached its conclusion." The craftsman's smile held no warmth as the fog swirled around us, carrying with it the promise of revelations yet to come. Vestry's smile held the calculated precision of a clockwork mechanism as he gestured toward the array of recovered instruments displayed upon his workbench. Each piece gleamed with the distinctive artistry that had marked his father's finest work, yet arranged with the methodical care of evidence prepared for final judgment. Holmes maintained his position near the central apparatus, his revolver steady while his keen eyes catalogued every detail of the workshop's sinister purpose. "Your confession regarding the technical method is admirable, Mr. Vestry," Holmes observed, his voice carrying that tone of analytical detachment I had learned to recognize as the prelude to comprehensive deduction. "Yet I suspect the true elegance of your system lies not merely in its mechanical precision, but in its systematic application across London's collecting community." Vestry's pale eyes brightened with something approaching professional pride. "You begin to comprehend the scope of my father's legacy, Mr. Holmes. These 4 deaths were merely the opening movement of a far more comprehensive symphony of justice." From beneath a cloth covering, he revealed a detailed map of London marked with numerous red pins, each indicating locations throughout the city's most fashionable districts. The scope of his intended campaign extended far beyond our initial investigation, encompassing what appeared to be a systematic effort to recover an entire generation of scientific instruments. 17 households have received my specialized attention in recent months, Vestry continued with evident satisfaction. Each installation providing the necessary infrastructure for both reconnaissance and ultimate justice. The beauty of the system lies in its elegant simplicity, Mr. Holmes. A small modification to existing pneumatic communication systems, virtually undetectable to casual observation, yet capable of delivering precise retribution with clockwork accuracy. Holmes studied the marked locations with growing understanding, his practiced eye recognizing addresses that represented the cream of London's scholarly collectors. The speaking tube installations were your preparation for a campaign of unprecedented scope, each household unknowingly harboring the very mechanism of their potential destruction. "Precisely," Vestry confirmed, moving to the brass timing device with the reverence of an artist discussing his masterpiece. The modified speaking tubes required specialized components, chemically treated rubber gaskets, impervious to the corrosive effects of prussic acid and subtle alterations to the internal bore to accommodate my delivery mechanism. The heated chamber, concealed within the decorative collar, would instantly vaporize the liquid acid when the timing device punctured its glass ampule. Holmes nodded with the appreciation of one craftsman recognizing another's skill. The whisper, heard by the servants, was the sound of rapidly expanding vapor escaping into the victim's study, followed by the inevitable collapse. The sweet, almond-like odor we detected was hydrogen cyanide, a poison that acts with terrifying speed while mimicking natural heart failure to the untrained observer. The locked rooms were a natural consequence of your method rather than an impossibility you sought to create, I interjected, my medical training allowing me to appreciate the diabolical precision of the technique. The victims, hearing the peculiar sound, would instinctively secure their privacy, only to succumb before they could summon assistance. Vestry's expression softened with what might have been paternal pride as he regarded the recovered instruments. Each piece represents months of my father's finest work, innovations in design and construction that advanced the very sciences these men claimed to revere. Yet none possessed the knowledge to recognize the genius before them, treating priceless artifacts as mere curiosities to impress their social circles. Holmes had moved closer to examine the collection, his magnifying glass revealing details of construction that spoke to extraordinary skill and artistic vision. The silver whistles served multiple purposes in your elaborate deception. They connected the deaths in a pattern that would baffle official investigation, their inability to produce sound serving as a subtle taunt about your silent methods. But most importantly, they drew attention away from the true prize. The missing instruments, Holmes continued, his deduction building with characteristic precision. You carefully selected victims who possessed specific, irreplaceable items crafted by your father. The whistles, designed in his distinctive style, were left as proprietary marks, silent declarations that you were reclaiming what was rightfully yours. From the shadows at the rear of the workshop came the soft scrape of a footstep, and Julian Armitage emerged into the dim light with the furtive manner of one who had been observing our exchange with growing apprehension. His appearance confirmed the final piece of Holmes's deductive framework. Mr. Armitage served as more than mere reconnaissance, Holmes observed, his penetrating gaze fixed upon the antiquarian. His reputation provided access to private collections, while his commercial expertise ensured that recovered pieces would find their way to more appreciative hands. The cleaning services he arranged were perfect cover for systematic theft, all while directing official attention toward phantom locked room mysteries. Armitage's composure cracked under Holmes's relentless analysis. My involvement was purely commercial, he protested weakly. I merely facilitated legitimate transactions. On the contrary, Holmes replied, you were the essential component that transformed murder into profit. Your visits to each victim finalized arrangements for the removal of specific items, while your network of continental buyers ensured their discreet disposal. The sound of approaching footsteps in the fog-shrouded court outside drew our attention toward the workshop entrance, where shadows moved with the purposeful intent of official authority. Holmes's expression sharpened with recognition as Inspector Lestrade's distinctive gait announced his arrival, accompanied by several constables whose presence would inevitably complicate our delicate confrontation. Vestry's hand moved towards something concealed beneath the workbench, his movements carrying the calculated precision that had characterized every aspect of his deadly campaign. Yet there was no panic in his manner, only the methodical preparation of one who had anticipated this moment with the same thoroughness he had applied to his systematic murders. It seems our consultation must reach its natural conclusion, Mr. Holmes, he said quietly, his pale eyes reflecting the gaslight with predatory intensity. Though I confess myself curious to observe whether your deductive abilities extend to anticipating the final movement of my carefully orchestrated symphony." The fog pressed against the workshop windows like eager spectators as the accumulated evidence of 17 potential murders awaited the dramatic revelations that would determine whether justice or continued slaughter would mark the Silver Whisper's ultimate legacy. In the swirling mist beyond, Lestrade's approaching footsteps carried the promise of official intervention, yet I sensed that our confrontation with Samuel Vestry had only begun to reveal the true depths of his methodical madness. Holmes's revolver remained steady as the shadows closed around us, the silver whistle in his pocket seeming to pulse with the accumulated secrets of 4 deaths and the terrible promise of 13 more to come. Vestry's hand emerged from beneath the workbench, gripping a small brass cylinder, fitted with clockwork mechanism, its surface bearing the same meticulous craftsmanship that had characterized his murder devices. The soft clicking of gears announced its activation as he placed it carefully upon the central workbench, his pale eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a master craftsman completing his finest work. "You will observe, Mr. Holmes," he said with that same professional courtesy that had marked our entire confrontation, "that my workshop has been prepared with the same attention to detail I devoted to my previous installations. The speaking tubes you see throughout these premises have been modified to serve as delivery conduits for a rather comprehensive demonstration of my methods." Holmes's keen eyes swept the workshop with renewed intensity, cataloguing details that had escaped our initial examination. The brass fittings we had assumed were merely decorative elements revealed themselves as components of an elaborate atmospheric weapon, each tube terminus bearing the subtle modifications that marked Vestry's deadly artistry. The sound of Lestrade's approach had grown unmistakably close, his authoritative voice directing constables to surround the building while he prepared to investigate the premises. Holmes calculated the remaining time with characteristic precision, his mind weighing options as the clockwork mechanism continued its relentless countdown. "Most ingenious, Mr. Vestry," Holmes acknowledged, his revolver steady despite our increasingly perilous situation. "Yet I confess myself intrigued by one aspect of your elaborate system." He withdrew one of the silver whistles from his pocket, holding it to catch the gaslight. "These silent instruments have served multiple purposes throughout your campaign, have they not?" Before Vestry could respond, the workshop door burst open, admitting Inspector Lestrade followed by 2 uniformed constables. The sudden influx of cold air swirled the lingering chemical scent as the inspector's lantern cast dancing shadows across the accumulated evidence of systematic murder. "Holmes! Watson!" Lestrade called, his eyes immediately cataloguing the deadly apparatus arranged throughout the workshop. "Samuel Vestry, you are under arrest for the murders of Sir Edmund Wortham, Sir Felix Grantley, Mr. Theodore Blackwood, and Mr. Geoffrey Whitmore." Holmes moved with sudden decisiveness, pressing the silver whistle against a decorative collar on one of the modified tube fittings. The instrument's base engaged perfectly with the brass threading, revealing its true purpose with elegant simplicity. "Observe, Lestrade," Holmes said, his voice carrying that tone of absolute certainty I had learned to recognize. "These whistles are not merely calling cards or mystical talismans, but precision-crafted tools. Each one serves as a specialized spanner, ground to exact specifications for removing the decorative collars that conceal Mr. Vestry's modification points. With practiced efficiency, Holmes used the whistle to unscrew the nearest fitting, revealing the rubber gasket and puncture mechanism within. His understanding of Vestry's system had extended to its most fundamental components, transforming apparent impossibility into mechanical inevitability. Vestry watched this demonstration with evident fascination, his professional pride warring with the realization that his elaborate deception had been completely penetrated. Your deductive abilities are remarkable, Mr. Holmes. Yet I fear my timing mechanism cannot be stopped once activated, and the concentration of prussic acid I have prepared will prove fatal even to those who have taken precautionary measures. On the contrary, Holmes replied, moving to examine the clockwork device with the concentrated attention he brought to his most challenging problems. Your very precision has revealed the weakness in your apparently perfect system. You have failed to account for the one variable that no amount of mechanical calculation can control. Holmes's hand moved toward the timing mechanism, not to stop its clockwork progression, but to redirect its function entirely. With surgical precision, he severed a critical connection in the pneumatic system, causing the device to vent harmlessly into the open air rather than through the modified speaking tubes. The soft hissing of escaping vapor marked the failure of Vestry's final gambit, while Lestrade and his constables moved swiftly to secure both the craftsman and the cowering Armitage. As the immediate danger passed, Holmes turned his attention to a collection of wooden cases stacked with mathematical precision upon the workshop shelves. "The astrolabe, Mr. Vestry," Holmes said quietly, examining the labelled compartments that revealed the full scope of the systematic theft. "Where have you secured Sir Edmund's most prized possession?" Armitage's composure collapsed entirely under the weight of accumulated evidence. "Henning's Wharf, Shad Thames," he stammered. "Bonded storage for a German collector. I thought to secure alternative arrangements after the second death raised suspicions." Holmes nodded with satisfaction as Lestrade barked orders for the immediate recovery of the missing instrument. The fog that had shrouded our investigation throughout the evening seemed to lift as the accumulated evidence of 17 planned murders lay exposed under the gaslight, their deadly precision finally rendered harmless by superior deduction. "The Silver Whisper has been silenced at last, Watson," Holmes observed as our prisoners were led away into the November night, and with it a campaign of revenge that transformed the very tools of scientific inquiry into instruments of methodical death. The fog that had shrouded our investigation throughout the evening began to dissipate as Lestrade's constables completed their methodical work within the workshop of Vestry and Vale. Holmes supervised the careful neutralization of the remaining apparatus with strong lye solution, his scientific training asserting itself even in the aftermath of our dramatic confrontation. The brass timing mechanisms, glass ampules, and modified speaking tube fittings were catalogued with meticulous precision, each piece bearing witness to the systematic nature of Vestry's deadly campaign. 17 households, Holmes, Lestrade observed grimly as he consulted the marked map we had discovered. 17 families who might have awakened to find their patriarchs dead in locked rooms, victims of what would have appeared entirely natural causes. The scope of this conspiracy defies comprehension. The sound of approaching wheels announced the arrival of a police wagon, its driver bearing urgent news from Henning's Wharf, where Armitage's confession had led to the recovery of Sir Edmund's missing astrolabe. The German collector, who had supposedly agreed to purchase these stolen treasures, proved entirely fictional, another layer of deception in Vestry's elaborate scheme. Within the bonded warehouse, constables had discovered not only the precious astrolabe wrapped in protective velvet, but also Mr. Whitmore's silver sextant and numerous other instruments of extraordinary craftsmanship. Holmes examined each recovered piece with the reverence of a scholar handling ancient manuscripts, his keen eyes cataloguing the distinctive artistry that marked the elder Vestry's finest work. "The true tragedy of this case," he observed quietly, "lies not merely in the 4 lives lost, but in the corruption of genuine artistic achievement into an instrument of systematic revenge." Our return to Baker Street carried with it the weight of contemplation, the familiar rhythms of London gradually reasserting themselves as the fog continued its retreat before the approaching dawn. Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully maintained a cheerful fire in our sitting room, its warm glow providing welcome contrast to the night's grim revelations. Holmes settled into his familiar chair with evident satisfaction, filling his pipe with deliberate care as he prepared to organize the complex threads of our investigation. "The technical method was elegant in its simplicity, Watson," he began, sending thoughtful spirals of smoke toward the ceiling. A small glass ampule containing liquid prussic acid, positioned within a heated chamber concealed in the speaking tube's decorative collar. The timing device would puncture the glass at a predetermined moment, instantly vaporizing the acid and delivering it directly to the victim's study through the existing pneumatic system. I considered the medical implications of such a delivery method, recognizing the terrible efficiency of hydrogen cyanide administered in concentrated vapor form. The victims would have had no warning, no opportunity to seek assistance. The locked doors were a natural consequence of their instinctive desire for privacy when they heard the unusual sound from the speaking tube. Holmes nodded with professional appreciation for the criminal's technical skill. Precisely. The beauty of Vestry's system lay in its complete deniability. The glass fragments would be overlooked in the initial shock of discovery, while the chemical evidence would dissipate rapidly. Only the silver whistles remained as deliberate clues designed to announce his presence while simultaneously misdirecting official investigation. He withdrew one of the mysterious instruments from his pocket, turning it slowly in the gaslight to study its intricate engravings. These silent whistles served multiple purposes in Vestry's elaborate deception. Most obviously, they connected the deaths in a pattern that would baffle conventional investigation. But observe their true function, Watson. Holmes moved to demonstrate how the whistle's base engaged perfectly with the threading of a modified speaking tube collar. Each whistle was precision crafted as a specialized spanner, ground to exact specifications for removing the decorative fittings that concealed Vestry's deadly modifications. They traveled from scene to scene as both signature and key, their inability to produce sound serving as a subtle jest about his silent methods. The systematic nature of the campaign became clear as Holmes outlined each element of Vestry's preparation. The patience required speaks to a mind of exceptional dedication, albeit one twisted by resentment. He spent months learning each household's routines, timing his installations to coincide with periods when modifications would remain undetected. Armitage provided the necessary intelligence, identifying which collectors possessed specific examples of the elder Vestry's craftsmanship. Our contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, accompanied, to my surprise, by Mr. Cornelius Vale, whose pale features bore the strain of recent revelations about his partner's treachery. Vale carried a lacquered box containing business correspondence that would prove invaluable in tracing each stolen instrument to its rightful owner. "I am deeply ashamed, Mr. Holmes," Vale said quietly, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. Samuel's bitterness over his father's lack of recognition had grown into something I failed to recognize as dangerous obsession. "I swear to you that every piece will be returned, and our business practices subjected to the strictest scrutiny." Holmes accepted Vale's contrition with characteristic reserve, though I detected a note of sympathy in his manner. The corruption of legitimate grievance into deadly obsession represents a form of madness that transforms scientific precision into an instrument of methodical death. Your partner's campaign was not mere criminal enterprise, but a systematic attempt to redraw the entire landscape of London's antiquarian market. As Lestrade departed with assurances that both Vestry and Armitage would face the full weight of justice, Holmes returned to his contemplation of the silver whistles. The fog had lifted entirely from Baker Street, revealing the familiar outlines of our neighborhood bathed in the pale light of early morning. "The silver whisper has been silenced at last, Watson," Holmes observed with quiet satisfaction. "And with it, a campaign that might have claimed 17 lives in service of a father's wounded pride. Yet I cannot escape the feeling that Samuel Vestry's story represents something more disturbing than ordinary criminality. His willingness to sacrifice innocent lives for the sake of recovering his father's work speaks to the dangerous extremes to which intellectual obsession can lead. The recovered astrolabe gleamed upon our mantelpiece, its intricate engravings speaking to centuries of accumulated knowledge and the patient dedication of craftsmen who had devoted their lives to advancing human understanding. That such beauty had become the catalyst for systematic murder represented a perversion of values that struck at the very foundation of civilized inquiry. As the morning light strengthened beyond our windows, I reflected upon the resolution of what would surely rank among our most complex investigations. The Silver Whisper case had demonstrated once again that the most elaborate criminal schemes, no matter how ingeniously conceived, must ultimately yield to the superior application of logical deduction and unwavering observation. Yet it had also revealed the terrible potential for genius to be corrupted by resentment, transforming the very tools of scientific progress into instruments of death. Holmes had already turned his attention to the morning's correspondence, his restless mind seeking new challenges worthy of his extraordinary abilities. The silver whistles remained upon our mantelpiece as silent testimony to the case's resolution, their deadly purpose forever neutralized by the triumph of justice over methodical evil. The pale morning light filtering through our Baker Street windows carried with it the promise of normalcy restored, though the events of the previous evening had left their mark upon both the familiar comfort of our sitting room and the deeper recesses of my mind. Holmes sat in his customary chair, organizing his notes with characteristic precision, while the recovered astrolabe occupied a place of honor upon our mantelpiece, its intricate silver inlays catching the winter sunlight and transforming the ancient instrument into a monument to both scientific achievement and the terrible price of obsession. 3 days following our dramatic confrontation at Red Lion Court, Lady Cordelia Wortham called to express her gratitude and to reclaim her husband's most prized possession. Her composure had returned with the resolution of the mystery, though I observed that she handled the astrolabe with something approaching reverence, as though it had been sanctified by its role in exposing the truth behind Sir Edmund's death. "Mr. Holmes," she said as she prepared to secure the instrument in its velvet-lined case, "I find myself both grateful and deeply troubled by your revelations. To think that Edmund's appreciation for fine craftsmanship should have marked him for such methodical destruction speaks to a form of madness that defies comprehension." Holmes regarded her with that mixture of sympathy and analytical detachment that characterized his finest moments. "The path to understanding, Lady Wortham, was not so straight as you might imagine. Its beginnings lay in several trifles that, when taken together, formed a thread stout enough to bear the weight of deduction. First, there was the whisper through the speaking tube and the sweet, cloying scent you described. Bitter almonds to a practiced nose, the unmistakable signature of prussic acid vapor. Then there was the absence above your speaking tube, the faint rectangular outline where an ornamental plaque had hung until someone removed it recently to conceal their modifications. He withdrew one of the silver whistles from his waistcoat pocket, turning it slowly in the morning light. But perhaps most revealing were these curious instruments themselves. Their silence puzzled everyone, yet their true purpose was elegantly simple. Holmes moved to demonstrate how the whistle's base engaged perfectly with the threading of a brass collar from his evidence collection. Each whistle was precision-crafted as a specialized spanner, ground to exact specifications for removing the decorative fittings that concealed Vestry's deadly modifications. They travelled from scene to scene as both signature and key, their inability to produce sound serving as a subtle jest about his silent methods. Lady Wortham watched this demonstration with growing understanding. Then the locked rooms were not impossible mysteries at all, but the natural consequence of his method. "Precisely," Holmes confirmed. "When your husband heard that peculiar whisper from the speaking tube, his instinct was to ensure privacy by securing his study door. The sound he heard was death itself expanding, air displaced by rapidly vaporizing prussic acid, delivered through a system he trusted implicitly. The timing device concealed within the gift your nephew delivered punctured a glass ampule at the predetermined moment, instantly converting liquid acid to lethal vapor within the heated chamber Vestry had installed behind the decorative collar. The technical elegance of the murder method continued to fascinate, even as its revelation brought closure to our investigation. In the days that followed, Inspector Lestrade provided regular updates on the legal proceedings against both Vestry and Armitage. The craftsman's confession, delivered with the same methodical precision that had characterized his murders, revealed the full scope of a conspiracy that had threatened 17 of London's most distinguished households. Vestry's workshop notebooks, discovered during a thorough search of his lodgings, contained detailed floor plans, servant schedules, and comprehensive inventories of instruments crafted by his father that remained in private hands. His patience had been extraordinary, spending months learning each household's routines and timing his installations to coincide with periods when modifications would remain undetected. "The true tragedy of Samuel Vestry," Holmes observed, one evening as we reviewed the completed case files, "lies not merely in his criminal actions, but in the corruption of legitimate artistic pride into an instrument of systematic revenge. His father's work possessed genuine merit that deserved recognition, yet the son's inability to accept the gradual process of historical re-evaluation transformed him into something monstrous." Holmes filled his pipe with deliberate care, sending thoughtful spirals of smoke toward the ceiling. "Consider the irony, Watson. Vestry's campaign of murder achieved precisely the opposite of his intended goal. Rather than elevating his father's reputation, it has forever associated the elder Vestry's name with systematic killing. The instruments that should have served as monuments to scientific progress became exhibits in a criminal investigation. The recovered instruments, revealed in their full scope through the systematic recovery process, proved to be of extraordinary quality and historical significance. Several pieces were acquired by the British Museum, where they would finally receive the scholarly appreciation that had been denied during their creator's lifetime. Yet this posthumous recognition came at a price that no civilized society could accept. As winter deepened over London, Holmes had already turned his restless intellect to new challenges, though I observed that he occasionally withdrew one of the silver whistles for contemplation, as though its silent surface might yet yield secrets about the nature of criminal obsession. The instrument's inability to produce sound served as a constant reminder that the most dangerous threats often announce themselves through absence rather than presence, through what they conceal rather than what they reveal. On our final evening of active involvement with the case, as Lestrade departed with news that both Vestry and Armitage would face the full weight of justice, Holmes offered his characteristic assessment of the broader implications. "The Silver Whisper investigation has demonstrated once again, Watson, that the most elaborate criminal schemes must ultimately yield to patient observation and logical deduction, yet it has also revealed something more disturbing about the potential for human genius to be corrupted by resentment." He moved to his violin, drawing the bow across the strings to produce a single, clear note that hung in the air like a benediction upon the instruments arrayed before us, some fashioned to measure the heavens, others turned to darker calculations, all reclaimed to their proper silence. Perhaps that is the true lesson of Samuel Vestry's campaign, that the line between justice and revenge is far thinner than comfortable society would prefer to acknowledge. His father's work deserved recognition, his grievances possessed merit, yet his methods transformed legitimate complaint into systematic murder. Holmes set the violin aside and reached for the morning's correspondence with the air of a man already attentive to another problem approaching over the horizon. The astrolabe had been returned to Lady Wortham, the stolen instruments restored to their rightful owners, and the modified speaking tubes rendered harmless by proper repair. Yet the memory of those 4 deaths, and the 13 that had been prevented only by our timely intervention, would remain forever associated with a distinctive craftsmanship that had originally been intended to advance human knowledge. "The Silver Whisper has spent itself, Watson," Holmes said quietly, his eyes already scanning the first of several urgent telegrams. "Let us see what the next current brings." The fog had lifted entirely from Baker Street, revealing the familiar outlines of our neighborhood bathed in honest winter sunlight, while the silver whistles remained in their drawer as silent testimony to a case that had tested even Holmes's remarkable powers of deduction. Somewhere in London's vast expanse, new mysteries were already arranging their clues with the same perverse care we had just unravelled, and I knew that it would not be long before the game was afoot once more.